Hello, I'm Jeff Scheidock, Dean of Students at Calvin Theological Seminary, and recently I was honored to host a conversation between Mark Braverman and Gary Burge about Israel and Palestine and about the ongoing violence in Gaza. Mark Braverman is a Jewish American with family roots in Israel. He's a retired clinical psychologist. He serves as the executive director of Kairos USA, a movement to unify and mobilize American Christians to work for a just peace in Israel and Palestine. Gary Burge is an adjunct professor of New Testament here at Calvin Theological Seminary, and he's an expert on the integration of theology and politics in the Middle East. Many people today equate Old Testament Israel with the state of Israel today. In this part of their conversation, Mark and Gary address this mistake and help us to see how the Christian gospel has a worldwide scope that no longer focuses on a specific place or people.
So help me put some of this together. Maybe both of you together. So we have the biblical Israel, and then Jesus comes along and says, "No more of that temple. I'm now the temple." We have Pentecost. We've talked a little bit about that now the Holy Spirit dwells in the people. We have a disjunction at that point, and I think Christians that I know, people that may be sitting in our congregations would be right along with you to that point. And then they see 1948, again, two different stories of what happened there, but this Israel now is that Israel then, and they're drawing a connection, but they're missing Paul. There's no longer Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female, and all of those things. So help me piece that together for that person sitting in my congregation to say, that Israel there and this Israel here, they're not the same.
One of the things that I find myself explaining again and again to churches is that the Israel of the Old Testament is called to be a covenant people. They are to organize their lives around the temple. They are to be a people who worship, who pursue righteousness. And the prophets come along and say, your social behavior with those who are widows and aliens and so forth really is the test of your own righteousness. And in the Old Testament, it says very clearly, if you fail in your covenant righteousness, you can no longer stay in the land. The Old Testament says the Holy Land does not belong to Israel, it belongs to God. And therefore, the land itself is going to expel you. So what you have here is a people, Israel, in the Old Testament, which has really a lot of requirements sitting on it, and that is spiritual fidelity to God, the God of Abraham, and a life of righteousness based on the law. Okay. What most of my friends don't realize is that, as Mark has said, the creation of the state of Israel was an invention that came out of a desire of European nationalism in the late 19th, early 20th century. Its custodians were secular Jews like Ben Gurion, and who really did not envision this country as having a religious basis, but saw the Old Testament stories as instruments to create cohesion for the country. Even when they began writing the initial documents for Israel before 1948, when the country was born, there's no inclusion of the name of God. I imagine that may have been pragmatic because there were plenty of disagreements among Jews about how you should frame that religious identity. But nevertheless, Ben Gurion and his friends were actually, maybe for the first time, studying the Bible to say, how can we appropriate this narrative? So you have, I think, Mark, correct me here, but you have people changing their names to biblical names. You have the changing of town locations, putting new Hebrew names on them, the changing of road signs. In other words, what you have is kind of the importing an Old Testament culture onto this secular state.
Well, the Hebrew language was reinvented.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yes, exactly right.
And, from being an ancient language like Latin, a dead language, it was reinvented to be the national language of Israel. That's not totally a Zionist project.
Which is a remarkable thing that they were able to do that.
That's wonderful.
That's incredible that they could do that. But they don't speak Yiddish there.
No, you don't speak Yiddish. That's the old country. That's the old
that's the
Jew.
old country. Exactly right.
Purge that.
So in a way, I hope people in the church actually see that the state that you are defending today is not the state that was centered around Jerusalem, say, in King David's time. This is a very different thing.
By the way, mythological. It never really happened.
Yeah. So in fact, today, as an Israeli would say, are you religious or not religious? That's their language for, do you observe Sabbath? Do you go to synagogue? That kind of thing. But the estimates I hear is 75% of Israel are not religious. Is that approximately right in your mind?
Yeah.
So
20% religious.
Yeah, 20% are religious. So here you have a population which is deeply secular. And so here's the thing that I imagine. If Jeremiah was resurrected and flew into Tel Aviv and he just toured the country for 2 weeks, would he say to himself, this is what I had in mind when I imagined the restoration of Israel? I have a feeling after he recovered from the things he observed, his prophetic words would be as sharp as ever.
I haven't thought about Jeremiah. I've thought about people don't talk about Jeremiah coming back, but they talk about Jesus coming back all the time.
Yeah.
So I picture Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives, to the east of Jerusalem, and as he does in the Bible, crying tears over Jerusalem. But he would not waste time crying very much. He would continue walking down the hill, walking west into Jerusalem, past the city center, into the hills west of Jerusalem, where stands the Knesset, the seat of Israeli government.
Yeah.
And what would he say? He would say, destroy this temple.
Oh, my. Well, yeah, that would get both him and you in a lot of trouble if you said that publicly in Jerusalem.
I started to say it publicly.
Yeah.
I told myself that as well. And I said, you know what, Braverman, it's time. And I said, but then I add to it. I say, he's not talking about bombs. He's not talking about explosives.
Right.
He's talking about the Spirit. And then I go on and I say, there are temples all over the world in need of prophets, iconoclasts, and radical reformers like Jesus saying, destroy this temple. This is not good for humanity.
This was one part of the conversation between Mark and Gary. If you'd like to hear more, you can click on the next part of the conversation, or you can click on the full conversation.